Hello and welcome to an update video for Shattered Drift. Shattered Drift is my game that I'm working on. It's in prototype phase. It's in prototype phase right now, and essentially it is a FTL like kind of colony sim game where you are on this tank-like drifter, sort of going around a frozen wasteland. Now, last week was the kind of end of the gameplay prototype, which, as a programmer, like professional gameplay programmer, is the easy part, right? And probably shouldn't have given myself 3 weeks to do that, and then only 2 weeks to do art because, yeah, I'm not that amazing at art. So we might be extending the art for a good another week. But yeah, the aim of this is that I want to get a game out in 3 months of development time. So it's not necessarily 3 months of calendar time because I have a young family and life sometimes takes precedence. Like, as in like 20 days, I'll probably take a week off. But these are just update videos for that. I'm going to do something slightly different. So we're currently in the kind of art prototype phase, and that's where I'm kind of working out how I want the art to look. And we're going to do something different to how I normally do it. We're not going to play any gameplay. Last week's video is there if you want to have a look at kind of where we finished with the gameplay prototype and talk about that. Instead, actually, I'm going to do a kind of bit by bit. I've got 7 builds that I've made up that we're going to jump through, and we're going to see the progression over the last week of some of the visual changes that I've made. And we've only been focusing this week on the environment. So the environment previously, I should have probably put in where we left off, but you can check that last week. But essentially, the environment was just a load of grids on the node, and that was something called like a Delaney triangulation. Basically, generated a load of random points, connected them, and then I did some pruning of them, and each point became a kind of node where, well, let's see if I can get any connection. Right, yeah, so each point on a node was a kind of location that you can visit. And so if we jump in, I said I wasn't going to do, I'll just ignore move limits. You see the map rotates. Now, I kind of wanted to have this kind of visually be rendered, like have an environment, right? We don't have an environment at the moment, so I wanted an environment. So yeah, so when you get to a location, action happens. So uh, the Delaney triangulation has a dual graph, like some basically it's got the inverse um, graph, which is basically the Veroni graph. And I don't know if you can hear, but I'm a bit coldy, which is why I'm probably not the clearest. But the show goes on. Essentially, a what it changes color when you zoom in. Essentially, what this means is that for any point in this polygon, each point is closer to this point than any other point uh, than any other node. So same with this purple area. Any point inside the purple area is closer to this node than it is to any other node, and that's essentially a Veroni graph. But the great thing about it is that actually they work really well for sort of generating something that kind of looks like, well, evenly spaced environments, as in like reasonably. My idea was to texture this polygon behind and then merge it with the others, and then you have a kind of textured area. Now, a caveat, I'm not that amazing at developing stuff like this. So the first thing was just getting the Veroni graph kind of working, and then we'll jump over to the next build now. Right, and in this next build, this is basically a couple of coding sessions after, I wanted to basically clip all of those edges to a kind of wider box so that we didn't have any space in the end. However, I didn't actually, like I'm on a bit of a time limit, so some problems are problems that ultimately I could solve, but I don't necessarily have the time to solve them. Like basically have a couple of hours a day at most to kind of work on this. If I'm lucky, I might get a chunk on the weekend. So yeah, we've got some empty space here, and I wasn't quite happy with this. But we powered on. It was kind of good enough. It was like I probably could clip the camera, so we'll go with that. So once I did that, it was time to add the textures in. So I'll show that now. Right, so yeah, once I've added the textures in, I actually decided to clip it right back because essentially adding the textures just showed off that there were gaps. I wasn't massively fond of that. And so I essentially just downloaded some textures online, wrote a shader to try and merge them by assigning each polygon like a biome. And so a biome would refer to a different texture, and then we'll try and blend the textures together. I'm kind of very inexperienced when it comes to how to make like writing shaders, and trying to do something quickly is not always the best time to learn, is in get into the minutiae of it. So this is what I ended up with. And to be honest, I was really not massively happy with this. And I was telling my wife that I kind of wasn't happy with this. I felt like, oh, this is a complete failure. Typical programmer. So I decided that I didn't want to make any programmer art, like pixel art, and I wanted it to be kind of visually distinct, even if it looked objectively worse from being visually distinct. I'd rather make something that's visually distinct. If you look at the last project I worked on something that was pixel arty, and I feel like whilst I am better at making that look a little bit better, ultimately, I'm not an artist. I don't practice like I'm an artist. I practice like I'm a programmer. And so, yes, there's talent, and I'm sort of not maybe as talented as an artist at a base level, but I also don't put the time in. So I wanted to find my own way of doing it. And so I wasn't really happy with it. And I was like, what can I do? Um, what can I do to make it more interesting? I was like, you know what? I just got to stick down the path of making it procedurally generated. But to be honest, the thing that really looks bad at this, the thing I really don't like, is these sharp edges. Like, how was I going to merge them together? I tried expanding it out to infinity. It looked rubbish. So I came up with this solution. So without changing any of the textures or any of the shaders, I decided to put it into a circle. It still had some artifacting from some of this code, but I felt like ultimately this looked better from the get go, right? Just looked more like it was something that was intentional. Just by changing it from a square to rendering inside of a circle, it felt like it was more substantial. And so that was really the first big step. And then I felt like essentially this map was two different things. So probably not the clearest way to say this, but I felt like there was a disconnect between the map, which had points on, and the like areas. And I sought to kind of unify them together, as I felt like that would make a more cohesive piece, and also maybe hide from some of these more ugly bits of shading that ultimately I didn't have the time to learn how to fix. So this is what I came up with the next iteration. So all I did was change out the nodes for a line renderer. I did in the end improve this line renderer. This wasn't kind of um, uh, what I ended up with, but I really like this effect because ultimately you have this kind of frozen background, um, and then you had these layers on top, and the game's called Shattered Drift, right? So um, essentially, the game is about um, this kind of fed. I felt like into the aesthetic of this shattered world. You're in these drifters, big tents, and then you're going through this kind of shattered world. So that was where I left off, and I felt so. Basically, all you would do is I just ignore the move limits. The actual gameplay limits, you would essentially end up with same position where you were moving in a world, and yeah, so you would go to an area, it would turn gold when you move to it, and you could kind of see what you would connect it to just by hovering over. And you also have the path lines here that helped you, and I was going to do something with them um, a little later. But first, I wanted to just deal with these edges. I felt like ultimately the edges weren't really what I was going for. Again, it was I changed to a circle, so at least those edges felt more intentional, but I don't feel like they necessarily showed off. They were still quite harsh, and I don't think it looked particularly good having this background. So back to shaders I went, and this is what I came up with. So you can see here that essentially all I did was add this fog shader, um, moving rolling fog, and that's just some noise layered on top of each other, moving in slightly different directions, and it's like not perfect, but it does the job. Also, when I made the lines sort of a bit harsher with this texture here, I wasn't in love with this, and we'll see how I change that in the future. But for the minute, I felt like reducing the textures and making it so that when you hover over it, so you can see more of the map, like it was less bold triangles and more these are individual regions, and then you could hover over and see the areas you selected. I didn't love that blue color that we were using before. So yeah, I felt like the world was coming together. It was a little bit more intentional and definite, um, and it felt like more cohesive. So if we jump into the next thing, which is basically where we ended up, you'll see the kind of final touches that hopefully I feel like, whilst not perfect, again, I don't feel like I'm the most wonderful artist. It's definitely something that I need to put more time to learn, and I also need to allocate more time to, maybe reduce the amount of gameplay elements that I put in, and focus more on the art because it's my weakness. But yes, so hopefully this final change you'll see actually shows off some of the depth of the world. Right. So the first thing that I did is I changed up the texture. So essentially, I brought back the tooltip as I felt like that was important. Um, at some point, I'm going to go look at the UI and the art for the UI. So that will be kind of touched on a little bit there. It's kind of not perfect at the moment. But we'll zoom out and have a look at the map now. So we've now got a texture underneath the map that I feel like helps show it off a little bit better. As in, like, it's less, again, it's more intentional. Ultimately, it's just a minor color change, but I do feel like it brings a kind of blue tint into it. And then we have the map itself, and I've changed the paths. They're still not wonderful, but they're better than they were. And we'll get some of the lighter textures and you can see what I've done there. So I wrote a custom shader for the paths, and essentially you have this tarmac here. So like just imagining that these were previously roads, and then you can see little indents where people have driven across them. But the snow's kind of come across the road as the kind of snow takes over the land. And then you've got this kind of grunge texture here. In a perfect world, I would love to kind of add some of the features of the world into them, and that's definitely something that I will keep on the back burner. But I felt like actually this was a good stopping point for the environment. There was some depth, there was some um, something visually interesting to look at, and ultimately, the view that you're going to be looking at most of the time is in here. This is essentially just a map selection screen. And so uh, yeah, next week the focus is on the tank and getting the drifter working, and hopefully getting that kind of scale looking good. Uh, Ultimately, of course, these are very pixel art at the moment, and so the challenge over the next uh, week or so is to get the scale right. Because again, I don't want to go for a pixel art look. Um, I feel like I can learn more by doing something different. Anyway, please let me know what you think. If you have any opinions, I'd love to hear them. Um, and any opinions, any criticisms, anything you like from this. Whether you think I've done a good job, whether you think it's just the worst kind of programmer art you've ever seen. It'd be great to get some feedback. Uh, that being said, yeah, next week I'm going to focus on the art for the actual trawler, and hopefully uh, we'll get some direction there, and I can stop pulling my hair out over art. Because we have covered the main two areas, which is the world and the tank. Anyway, thanks for watching. Have a wonderful, wonderful week. Um, and I hope it's, you're enjoying the kind of colder, darker nights, this period of the year that I quite enjoy. And I feel like it's fitting making a cold game in a cold time of year, unless you're the other side, upside down side of the globe. Anyway, thanks for watching. Have a wonderful, wonderful week. Goodbye.